Well, what a spectacular start to the Series 10 finale. Though a little bit slow in places, this week's Doctor Who episode had me on the edge of my seat throughout, grinning to myself all the way through about the return of the Mondasian Cybermen and John Simm's master, plus working out that Razor was the latter in disguise. Oh my god, it was just absolutely brilliant. But let's cut to the chase and go through things chronologically, because there was something that happened before that. There were a lot of shocks and surprises in this episode. But the first major one was in that pre-title scene. Wow. I mean, I'd heard the rumours, certainly. It wasn't a complete surprise to me. But still, nevertheless, seeing that kind of presumably Antarctic, snowy, snow-capped base, opening shots, opening vista, landscape, and then zooming in onto the Doctor and the TARDIS, and the Doctor regenerating, it was just completely thrilling. A great start to the story and a really good way to keep viewers hooked and to keep them watching. But with regards to the setting, it's basically just a massive confirmation that David Bradley is returning to play the first Doctor. I mean, come on. That is the snow-capped base, the Antarctic, 1984, around the same time that the first Doctor was there. That's got to be more than a coincidence, surely, that they look so similar, these settings. And so I'm about 90% certain that perhaps as the cliffhanger to next week's episode, there will be that reveal of David Bradley as the first Doctor. Moving on to Misty in the start of the episode, I loved the cheeky nod to the whole Doctor Who debate. What is the Doctor's name? The name of the central character in this show, because that's a debate that's been going on in the fandom behind the scenes for years. If anything, on a personal level, it's made me realise that actually it's not quite as blasphemous as I first thought to refer to him as Doctor Who. I mean, it's not the end of the world, certainly. No, that's a Series 1 episode. Ha ha ha, very funny. But no. I do, however, still refuse to believe that that is his name. Obviously, the Doctor isn't his name either, but it's more of a name, it's more of a title. And as Missy asserts, Doctor Who is the question you ask in response to the name the Doctor. So certainly I think it's a kind of secondary thing. The Doctor should take priority, I think, as the name for the central character of Doctor Who. But obviously there is that element of Doctor Who as well, the question that should never be asked. And so it's nice to see that addressed in the TV show, even though it's kind of verging on fourth wall, breaking, and verging into the fandom behind the scenes, breaking that wall and completely opening up the boundary there. But nevertheless, nice to see that on screen. Next point. Is this the best Cybermen story ever? Perhaps not counting Big Finish because of spare parts, which I'm going to talk about later on, of course, but definitely on TV and certainly in the new series when we've not had a very good range of Cybermen stories, I don't think. There's just that focus on the conversion process, on the creepy hospital, and this is something that I've been wanting to see in a Cybermen story for years, I really have. I made a figure adventure about it before I did stop motion and stuff, which is photos, with the 3.75-inch figures. It was in about 2014, called The Ultimate Upgrade. Anyway, that was set in a futuristic hospital. Obviously, this is more creepy. It's an old-looking, decrepit, decaying, creepy old hospital. But still, nevertheless, the same concept, that it works so well to have that focus on the conversion process, the horrors of it, the terror. And I think that's the best way to communicate that central concept of the Cybermen to the viewers and to the audience. It's the most fundamental part of that concept, and I'm just so pleased it's really been stripped back to that. The whole horror of that process, instead of having Cybermen just shooting around or at war with humans or whatever else we've seen so far in the new series. This seems much more true to that original concept, which I am just over the moon about. So, the genesis of the Cybermen. Yes, spare parts. Can it still be considered canon or not? Well, it's too early to say, isn't it, really? We've not seen the Doctor Falls yet, and I'm hoping that there is at least a line in passing of dialogue in that story that kind of confirms the two can coexist together, because there's been a lot of queries about it behind the scenes in the fandom. If not on screen, at least something behind the scenes would be nice. Moffat acknowledging spare parts and saying, okay, that audio did inspire this story, and, I have considered the complications and complexities involved in doing a Genesis of the Cybermen story, and, this is what I've got to say about it, and that the two can coexist. That's what I'm really hoping for, either off-screen or behind the scenes, because I think really we need an answer as fans, and I'm sure if we don't get an answer, people will theorise and they'll make it work. Because, in these days in Doctor Who, you can make anything work. You can bring back doctors and all sorts of monsters and have them opposite each other with old companions and new companions. That's basically what Big Finish is about. That's how Big Finish make their money, by doing all those impossible combinations. I'm making Big Finish sound like a really kind of mean, profit-making capitalist company, and I'm sure they're not. They're definitely not. Sorry, Big Finish. But yeah, that's what I've got to say about that, definitely, and I'm sure I'll have a bit more to say about it next week, when we see if this issue is addressed on screen or behind the scenes. Now on to Bill and her conversion. Wow, such a terrifically dark moment. But there is a niggling little bit in my mind, a part of me that doesn't sit quite easy with Bill being converted. Not least because it's an emotional process, it's an emotional thing, and Bill is a great character, but that's not what I'm talking about. I don't sit too easy with it from a kind of narrative, behind-the-scenes perspective, looking at Doctor Who as a wider, broader thing. Because if you take into account Series 9, the last companion, basically, Clara Oswald, she died. Now, I know she was brought back in Hellbent, which is a decision that I defend completely. I think that was always part of the original plan for Clara's demise. But as well, you can't help but think that Bill might receive the same treatment in episode 12 of this series, and that history might repeat itself. And especially if it does, that'll be very unfortunate. Even if it doesn't though, and Bill does stay dead, or as a Cyberman, there is still a little bit of an issue there. I mean, obviously, as standalone things, 1.5 years apart, it's not a major issue, but there is something there, in my head that's going, this is a thing, a parallel, and has picked up on it. Yeah, so not a major issue. Definitely as a standalone thing. It's just such a brilliant, bold, brave decision to convert the companion into a Cyberman. It's the most obvious, shocking way to convey that terror, that threat, that fear of the Cyberman conversion process. I can't believe it's not been done before, to be honest. We've had similar things with guest characters, I suppose. Mrs. Moore springs to mind. Yvonne Hartman, obviously, as well. People like that, but never the actual companion, the closest person, that the point of relation for the viewer. In the narrative, that is the companion's job, and so to convert them into the monster is just such a great decision, a really, really good move, and it's just so big, so bold, so brave, and I really, really hope that Bill's death, or conversion, is not undone. She stays dead, and we get that real impact. This is about impact. I think Clara's death was about impact, but then at the end of it, there is Hellbent, and that is part of a wider, a bigger scheme in Moffat's head, and I think I can sort of see that. There was meant to be the impact there, but with Bill, I definitely get the feeling that she is completely dead, and it just all is about impact, and wow, the companion is now a Cyberman. A little side note, I've seen a lot on Twitter this evening, the evening after World Enough and Time has aired, the Saturday evening, that Bill's death is an attack on the LGBT community, because Bill is the first openly gay companion in Doctor Who, and she's been killed. And apparently that's like a TV trope, for gay people to get killed in TV and film and literature and whatever else. And I think this is just absolutely ridiculous, really, that it's got no grounding in anything whatsoever. I kind of get the need for representation and stuff, but to use it as an excuse to not kill a three-dimensional character and to not make that decision for the impact on the audience, because that is the priority here, not whether she's gay or whether she's straight or whatever else. I'm sure none of my viewers think the opposite of that and defend that decision, because that's just ridiculous. I think it's ludicrous to claim such a thing. And definitely, I think it was the right decision to kill Bill, regardless of anything else, any other factor whatsoever. Now, let's talk about John Simm. Wow, again, he was just magnificent in this story. The whole Razor reveal, now looking at this objectively, it was great for the casual viewer, certainly, that didn't have a clue what was going on. Maybe someone that knew John Simm was returning but hadn't seen too much of the filming stuff, the spoilers behind the scenes, because I will admit that I'd seen a suggestion that this character walking around with Bill on the streets of Cardiff during filming was John Simm in disguise after the announcement had been made about him, and the select few had picked up on that behind the scenes, and me included. But even for those casual viewers that haven't got all of that context, it would have been so great for everybody to go into this episode not having a clue about John Sim, or the Mondasian Cybermen actually, but particularly with John Sim. That would have just been such a great shock at the end when he takes off that mask. A really great moment, and there's definitely vibes actually there from Eurus, from Sherlock. Absolutely, I kind of twigged this when I considered that Razor might be the Master before this episode had aired. It's interesting to draw the parallels between Moffat's Doctor Who and Sherlock, because I mentioned in a previous review that the Doctor keeping Missy in the vault is a lot like Eurus and Sherlock, and the barrier between them, Eurus on Sharonford, the island, and the whole thing with music as well, the violin versus the piano in Doctor Who. Just a little parallel, a little thing, behind the scenes, contexty thing about Moffat as the writer and his tropes and the kind of things he tends to do. It sounds like a kind of English essay or something like this, doesn't it? Putting that aside, on the other hand, I do recognise the need for the BBC to publicise this finale, to advertise it, and I suppose the Mondasian Cybermen and John Sim making a reappearance were two of the main selling points for this finale, certainly generating that amount of hype that has been present in the Doctor Who fandom this week in particular. That wouldn't have been possible without both of them, well, definitely without both of them. Maybe if there was just one of them, so for instance if they didn't tell us about John Sim, but we did know about the Mondasian Cybermen, it wouldn't have been quite the same, I think, because there are two major selling points there, two massive things that mean a great deal to Doctor Who fans that have been watching the show for a long time. I think the combination of those two massive elements is what really made the hype for this story. So there is a bit of a conflict there about whether it was better to know or not know, whether the BBC should have spoiled it for us in inverted commas. Yeah, there'll always be a bit of a conflict about whether it was necessary or not for the hype to get people interested into this story. And yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm not quite sure where I sit, probably a bit on the fence with that issue, to be honest. One thing I did love was the kind of identity crisis going on between the John Sim Master and Missy. And certainly from the Next Time and TV trailers for next week, one line he says is, "I'm never going to side with the Doctor." Missy, on the other hand, a bit like me actually with this previous issue that I was just discussing, she seems more on the fence, on the threshold of being good or being evil. And I think for her it'll be a choice between the Master, well, she is the Master, but the John Sim Master, or the Doctor, good or evil. And I think there will be more to it than her just going completely back to being evil. Because otherwise, what is the point of Moffat doing this whole thing with the vault? It would just take the whole concept of the Master back to square one, I think. And whilst there is an element of that that's necessary to keep the character of the Master alive, that fundamental universal concept of the friend-enemy thing that has to keep going. You can't change it too much because it's such a fundamental part of Doctor Who, really. But I still get the feeling that something is going to happen. Even if she does switch, it's not going to be quite so simple. For instance, could this very identity crisis hold the key to the resolution of the finale, to the way that the whole thing is resolved? I mean, I'm going to suggest that perhaps the discrepancy between the two incarnations will cause the Master to, well, I'm not quite sure, maybe combust or something similarly spectacular and major and end-of-the-world-ish. That was really vague. But I do think there's a potential for there to be a bit of conflict there, even if it's just a little bit, and certainly that's going to have something to do with how this story is resolved, I think, and the Doctor, the 12th Doctor, his upcoming demise, really, and that's all going to tie in somehow, I guess. So, to sum up my thoughts on World Enough and Time, it was a phenomenal episode, absolutely phenomenal, really just spectacular. The Mondasian Cybermen back in full force and creepier than they've ever been for the past 50 years. Missy as entertaining as ever, playing Doctor Who, and John Sim's Master, the Master of Disguise, everybody. It's just got to be the best episode of Series 10 so far, surely. And if next week's second instalment, closing instalment for the whole series, is anywhere near as good, then this finale will definitely be a strong contender for the best finale that Doctor Who has ever seen. And I mean that completely seriously, I really do. It just looks set to be an absolute inferno, it really does. A completely epic end to the 12th Doctor's era. And so next week, Personally, I think it looks like a very fitting end to the run, a good combination of epic scale and massive explosions and set pieces, with those more intimate, personal moments that often define Moffat's finales. From the trailer, I was getting a lot of Death in Heaven vibes, not least because both stories have a similar colour palette of desaturated greys and greens, and also they both feature the Cybermen, in particular Nightmare in Silver variations. I honestly haven't a clue what's going to happen. I'm sure I'll speculate about it a lot this week. But overall, I predict that the whole tale will end on a much more personal note, perhaps boiling down to a three-hander between the Doctor, Missy and the Saxon Master in the kind of final act, I suppose. Another prediction I'd like to make at this stage is that some people will absolutely hate the Doctor Falls. Now this might seem a bit unreasonable, but just take a step back for a moment, consider where we are. We've had a pretty well received episode 11 of mainly kind of setup really, and some huge hype surrounding the following final instalment. And this could very easily parallel with Series 9, with Heaven Sent and Hell Bent, the very contrasting juxtaposition of fan reactions to those two stories. And as someone that liked Hellbent, and has seen it many times since, and has kind of forced himself to understand it and consider what it's about, and I think I do get it now. I did a video about defending Hellbent, if you want to go and check that out. But as someone that likes Hellbent, yes, I kind of get the feeling that it's not going to be too long before fans start condemning Series 10. Because if you think back, there was a time when everybody loved Series 9 when it was on air, particularly at this very high point in the series after Heaven Sent. And then there was Hellbent, which everybody hated really. And a few minutes down the line, you got the same fans that enjoyed the series saying, oh, it was all fan service, as if they're not actually meant to like it, that they're not trying to like it. They're distancing themselves from that kind of attitude toward liking Doctor Who Series 9. And that is something I find very strange, really. Very, very strange. But yeah, only time will tell, ultimately. But if this does happen a few months down the line, and everyone's saying, oh, Chibnall's going to be so great, Series 11, you know, what a fresh start. The show needs a fresh start, because everyone said the pilot was a fresh start at the time. But yeah, I'll gloss over that for the moment. All I'm saying is that if this does happen, you heard it here first, folks. And so, that's it for this week. If you enjoyed the review, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Please also go and check out my John Sim Master character analysis if you haven't already. An extra little video that I squeezed in this week in anticipation for this episode, basically. Next week, the Doctor will be without hope, without witness, and without reward. I'll see you then for my final Series 10 review. The Doctor is very much about to fall. Bye for now, guys.